Alright, for today's guide we're going to be looking at the mission difficulty system as well as the system that determines exactly what mechs you're facing and how many of them. So to start off with, this contract difficulty variance. Some people have expressed confusion in the past about what exactly that does. All this particular option when you're starting a new game does is decides if you're on, well, in a bit we'll discuss the Roguetech settings that determine whether your difficulty is based on your lance rating or the planet rating. But this contract difficulty variance determines how many half-skull steps there are between your current difficulty, whichever way it's set, and the potential missions you get. So, with a contract difficulty variance of 2, which is the default, that means if you're using the planet-based difficulty, if you're on a 3-skull planet, the missions are going to be between 2 skulls and 4 skulls. So, 2 half steps in either direction. If you have this set to max, then you're going to have 2.5 steps in either direction. So if you're on a half-skull planet, you can still get 3-skull missions. And if you're on a 3-skull planet, you can get anything from half-skull missions to 5-skull missions. Now, it's worth noting here, let me just tab over. In Roguetech, the skulls are roughly 16.5 million C-bills per half-skull of value. And we'll get to how that's distributed in a little bit. But first, just keep in mind, every half-skull of difficulty is roughly 16.5 million C-bills worth of mechs and equipment. And the theoretical design maximum is 12.5 skulls, which is only achievable if you're playing with difficulty based on lance rating. If you're using difficulty based on planet rating, the highest rated planet is 5 skulls. So as far as I know, if you have difficulty variance set to max, then the highest difficulty you can face is a 7.5 skull mission. Now, there is a difference, as you'll see here. If you have the Roguetech install set to generate missions based on company rating, then the number of mechs is largely fixed, and the quality, the value, will scale based on your most expensive mechs, up to the deployable amount. So if you have all 8 mech slots unlocked, then you're going to be dealing with missions based on the value of those 8 mechs. If you only have 4 unlocked, the base starting 4, then your difficulty will be based on those starting 4, your 4 most expensive mechs. So, the reason this says quality is because this is how you can actually get well above 5 skull territory. If you have a lance rated at 10 stars, then if you're using company rating, the quality, the value of the stuff that's dropping against you is going to be increasing based on how expensive your mechs are. However, if you're playing by planet rating, the difficulty of the mission still scales with your most expensive mechs. So enemy mech quality is mostly fixed based on the skull rating of the planet, but the quantity, the number of mechs that will spawn, is based on your most expensive mechs. So it is my understanding, talking a little bit in the Discord with the modders, that dropping into a mission, if you're going by company rating, you're less likely to have support lances, but the enemies are more likely to have better gear. And if you're dropping by planet rating, you're more likely to have support lances, but less likely for them to have better gear. At least that's my understanding, having talked to them. So we'll get to the actual dropping stuff, and I'll actually give you a couple quotes from them. But that's the difficulty variation based on whether it's lance or planet rated. Alright, so if you head into the... Well, first let's go to navigation, look at the planet we're on, just so we're all on the same page. So this is a 3.5 skull planet. Alright? So 3.5 skulls is the base difficulty because I have it set to planet rating, not to lance rating. Now then, In the command center, because we have the difficulty variance of 2, that means everything here is going to be between 2.5 and 4.5 skulls. 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5. So everything is within 2 half skull steps of the 3.5 skull planet rating. So this is basically how a mission figures out how much value it has, is the skull rating. So again, going back to the site, the half skull is approximately 16.5 million CBOs. Now, what determines how that value is distributed is in part how many lances there are, in part what the mission is, and in part what faction you're facing. So for this particular mission, this is a blackout, which means you're going to be facing up to, well, there's going to be 2 primary points where you're fighting something with potential for support lances at the start of the mission. So you could be fighting 1 lance, you could be fighting 4 or 5 lances, depending on how many support lances there are. But because we're against the pirates, whenever we drop in during the mission load time, it's going to decide how many lances we're fighting based on the mission type. It's going to look at how much value it has to distribute based on the skull rating. And it's going to distribute it by pulling random mechs off of a list that is specifically for the pirates. So there's a list of potential mechs that the pirates can have, and it's going to pick those, as far as I understand, at random, until it has enough value and enough units to fill out the required lances. So what can happen, at least from my observations, if you go into a mission and the mechs that it randomly picks and drops in, for example, in a blackout, if there's nothing at the first point and there's no support lances and you're facing just a single lance of mechs, if it pulls cheap, terrible mechs from the mech list for that faction, then you just face a lance of cheap, horrible mechs, even though it's a higher skull difficulty. Like what happened in my Warden Wolves playthrough, I was dropping on, I believe it was a 4.5 skull blackout. I think it was actually against the pirates, and they had a couple support mechs that had no weapons, and it was just like a joke. It was an absolute joke. But that's specifically because the blackout mission doesn't have that many lances. Like, even if it has turrets and then a lance, it's still the turrets soaking some of the value, and then the lance soaking some of the value. But there's no guarantee that it's going to maximize that value. Whereas, if you face the clanners, from what I've seen, if those randomly picked mechs exceed the mission value, then the system doesn't seem to have a problem with that. So if the table of mechs that the mission is pulling from is full of stuff that's very valuable, like Clan, Comstar, Word of Blake, then you end up potentially with more value than what normally would be on that mission. And if you're pulling from something like planetary government, pirates, etc., you end up sometimes with less value than what should be on that mission. So, target acquisition, from what I've seen, picks all of the mechs and vehicles that you face based on the difficulty rating, except the kill team. The kill squad that comes in at the end of the target acquisition, as far as I've seen, has some kind of the difficulty has some kind of effect on them, because I have noticed that dropping on 2.5, 3 skull target acquisitions have created kill squads that are considerably less terrifying than 5 skull target acquisition kill squads. But as far as I can tell, the kill squad value is completely separate from the difficulty of the mission that you're going on, or rather, completely separate from the units that are already in the mission difficulty. Assassinate target. The assassination missions, from what I've seen, seem to pull all the mechs for the support lances and the reinforcements and the escort and all of that from the mech library for that faction. And then the assassinate target, depending on which assassinate mission it is, for example, there's the assassinate mission specifically where the target is in a cicada. That's going to be a cicada. But if it's a normal assassinate mission, then the assassinate target, as far as I can tell, is pulled from a separate value pool rather than, well, not necessarily a separate value pool, but it seems to have more value in it than the other mechs on the table. So I can't say for certain if it's actually pulled separate from the value for the mission for all the other lances, or if it's just it gets the lion's share of the value. But regardless, the assassinate target's always going to be more valuable unless it's the cicada mission. If it's the assassinate the cicada mission, it's always going to be a cicada. But otherwise, it generally has a much higher value in the assassinate target than in everything else. Battles are very straightforward. Ambush convoy, again, the value is split up between the escorts, the supporting lances, the reinforcements, the escort targets, the ambush, the convoy you're ambushing itself. And so, usually on ambush convoy missions, the value tends to be more spread out. So, depending on how your lance is set up, that might make it easier or more difficult. Defend base, other than the defend base specifically that says there's an assault mech or two, the regular defend bases, they have the value, as far as I can tell, split where the Vanguard lance has a set value based on difficulty, or a smaller value, and then the reinforcements that show up once you get to, I think it's turn 4, the reinforcements that show up have more value. They always have more value than the Vanguard did. Destroy base. Sometimes there's turrets, sometimes there's not. Usually there are. And again, turrets are taking some of the value away from the mechs. But the mechs, again, are all based on what faction you're facing. The library of mechs that are being pulled are based on the faction you're facing. And yeah, escort, recovery, they're basically the same as battles. Recovery is just important. Keep in mind, some recovery missions have a single capture point, in which case there's a single lance that's holding all the value. And some missions have 2 points, so there's 2 lances that are splitting up the value. And I don't see any duels, but from what I've seen, the duels follow the same rules. They pick a mech based on the faction you're fighting and with a value closely appropriate for your difficulty that you're at, and then drop as just a single mech. And it might have its own library that it pulls for dual targets or for dual mechs, but it might not. In any case, the key thing to take away from this is that the mission that you pick is the only thing that the difficulty by... Well, I shouldn't say the only thing. Let me rephrase. When you're picking a mission, if you're picking based on the... using the difficulty based on your lance rating, the enemies are going to have higher and higher quality as your lance gets better. If you're picking based on planet rating, there's going to be more and more support lances as your mechs get better. And whenever you load into a mission, based on the difficulty, based on the faction you're fighting, it seeks out X number of mechs or vehicles or turrets from a library based on the faction. So, that's basically all there is to say about that. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And if I don't have any answers, I will jump over to the Roguetech Discord and find out what I can. However, I do want to leave with a couple quick quotes, I guess, from the Roguetech modders, or at least one of them, when asking about the enemy lances and the combat value that's being chosen from. It's more complicated than just enemy lances chosen by total value. the mission calls for X mechs with Y tags and Z difficulty per mech. And then it rolls to see what shows up based on those conditions. The Lance Defs selects a bunch of mechs that meet their tag specifications and tries to add up to a battle value. So there's a chance, again, like I said, that you'll end up with a 4.5 skull mission on a blackout where only a single lance is dropped in the entire mission, and it's a cheap lance because that's just what got rolled on the table. But yeah, so I think I already summed it up. So if you have any questions, I already said that too. Yeah, so that's it for today's guide. Until next time, have a good one.